Okay, welcome to another iPad painting tutorial. In today's tutorial I'm going to paint a lake that's lined by trees with some mist and a really nice warm sunset as well. So as usual, if you want to follow along, I'm using the app Procreate. I've opened a default A4 canvas, and in terms of the brushes, I'm going to be using just the brushes that come free with the app. So within the airbrushing section, at the top of the list there's a soft brush and a medium brush. I'm going to use both of those. So importantly, not the ones that are lower down, it's the ones at the top. I'm also within the artistic brushes going to be using the hearts brush. And then maybe at the end I'm going to use within the calligraphy brushes, maybe the water pen. So in terms of the colours, I've already pre-selected some colours in this section. So you go to the colour disc, look at the values, you'll notice there are codes called hexadecimal codes, and in this video description I've listed all the codes and you can type them in one at a time, press enter, the colour appears up here and you can piece it together yourself. Next to those colour codes is a link that takes you to my Patreon page and you can download the whole colour file for free. You'll also find links to my Instagram where you can tag me if you have a go at any of these tutorials, a Facebook group that has over 30,000 members, and I've just started a TikTok channel as well, so if you want to go and follow me and watch me there, then that's great. All the links are down in the description. With all that said and done, let's get started. So we'll go to our colours, we'll pick this first colour in, we'll go to the colour disc, you can see where it is. It's a very greyed out pink, and I'm just going to drag it onto that first layer and it just flood fills that entire layer. I'm going to create another layer, go back to my colours, second colour in, and I'm going to use airbrushing, soft brush, I'm going to put it up to 15% size and 100% opacity, and just about here, so a little bit up from halfway. We're going to create a nice thick band of that lighter colour. Then we're going to go to our adjustments, Gaussian blur, and we're going to slide it across to about 60%. And then I'm going to create another layer, go back to my colours, the third colour along, turn the brush size down to 10%, and just at the bottom area of what we just created, I'm going to just go over that a couple of times. Doesn't need to be as thick this time. Adjustments, Gaussian blur, blur it in again, this time to about 40%. Create another layer. Back to our colours, and the fourth colour in. We've got similar but a lighter version, and we're going to stay with the soft brush, but we're going to turn it dramatically down in size to about 3%, and we're also going to turn it really low on the opacity to about 10%. And what I'm going to start doing is just building in with light taps some texture that cuts all the way across. Now I'm doing it as quite a broken texture. I'm allowing gaps between it. I'm just creating sweeping motions of this textured cloud look, and then I can go back in and I can do another sweep of it, and you can hear from the tapping of the brush that it's separate marks, and I'm allowing my hand to sweep across and then sort of building in those textures as I move. And then I'll just move a little bit more up and just repeat the process. Maybe one underneath that section. And I just keep doing this again and again, building it up. And then I'm going to increase the size of the brush to about 6%, turn it down even further to about 5% opacity, and I'm just going to go over the middle section of that a few times, just bind it all together a little bit. So the texture's still there, but I'm just kind of blending them all in a little bit more together. I'm going to turn the brush size down even further to about 4%, maybe just create another broken section here at the top. So I'm just creating bands of these colours. I'm going to create another layer, go to my fifth colour along. I'm going to have the brush size at about 4% and about 10% opacity, and I'm going to build in some of this warmer colour now. As we get further towards that horizon where the sun is setting, we're going to get some of these warm colours. I'm just building a band of this warm colour across, going over it a few times and pressing quite lightly. I can also allow it to just creep up into this area a little bit as well. Not too much though. It's definitely concentrated a little bit more over to this left side. I can bring it down a little bit, perhaps turn the size of the brush up to 10%. Just encourage it down in this direction. Go back to my layers, create another layer, back to my colours, and I'm going to go for the fourth from the right now, so this orange colour. I'm going to turn the size of the brush down to 3% size and keep it at 10% opacity. And I'm going to begin just at the bottom of some of these sections. So you can see I've got almost like a little highlight of orange there, and I'm just going to further the textured look by just picking up a few more highlights in this section. Not too much. In fact, it looks really light, that. So I'm going to move along to this orange over here and use the one at the end. I just think I want it a little bit richer, that orange, and that's going to do a slightly better job. And then I can bring some of these extra textures a little bit further down as well. Just keep it quite broken, very light as you can see. You can probably barely see it, in fact, and that's good. Keep everything on different layers, so I'm going to create another layer, go back to my colours. Now I've got this yellow, which is really quite vibrant, so we'll add some of that in and then we'll soften it with some of this really light colour. So we'll go for the yellow, put it at about 4% size, stick at the 10% opacity. I'm just going to build a band of yellow coming in from this side, and then a really more significant band a little bit below that as well. Increase it up to about 6% and maybe just introduce a bit more of it lower down as well. Have it softening in. I'm really pressing lightly, trying to just smooth and soften that area generally with some of that yellow. That helps. We'll stay on the same layer for this, but we'll go back to this much lighter colour, this side of the yellow. Turn it down to 4% size and keep it still quite low, but a bit higher at 20%. And I'm just going to start ramping up some of the brightness now of this colour. I want it to be a bit more impactful, like this. Now, if you start to feel like it isn't just quite getting the vibrancy that you want, you always have the option to go to the adjustments and use some of the tools that are here. So we could use the bloom setting, and you can just take it this way, and you can see it really brings in a strong, you can go too far quite easily, and it is a bit too much, that. But when you put it back down to 0, you can see it's not quite getting the luminosity. So I'm going to put it at about 20%. It's really helping, and it just starts to give us something to work from, really. So we're building up that intensity, and we can then judge everything else based on that. So I'm going to just build up the intensity of the light colour in this area. Maybe go back to the yellow, turn the brush size down to about 3%, keep it at 20%, and just again increase some of the yellow that's in this area. Maybe I can just block it in there a little bit, and then as it comes over here it starts to break apart a little bit more. I'm going to turn it down to 2% so I can be a little bit more precise with my textures. So it's just like it's fraying along this edge and breaking apart. I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to go to this orange colour that we have at the end, and I'm going to keep it on the 2% size and put it up to about 30% opacity. And along this line now, I'm just going to go along there and just sharpen up the edge. So I definitely want more of this orange impacting. So I'm just going to carefully do that edge, just make it a little bit crisper where it transitions from the orange to the yellow. Doesn't matter if it's a bit textured, you can go over it a few times. That isn't really so much of an issue. So it's a little bit fuzzy on that edge, a little bit soft, so we're just sharpening it up a little bit more. Then we can increase the brush size and just soften that in a little bit. This doesn't matter beyond that point because we're going to add trees and other things anyway, so that doesn't really matter. It's only really that top edge that we're interested in. Then I can go back to the layer 7 and back to my whiter colour. It's not white, but it's a lot whiter than anything else. Have it at around 3% size and 30% opacity again. And again, I can just ramp up the brightness in this section. back up to my orange layer, and I'll use the yellow just to break up this orange as well. We don't want it entirely flat. We'll just create some streaks of this yellow that cut through it. Now we'll go back to this sky a little bit later on and just see how it's relating to everything else, and maybe just ramp up the lighting effects if it needs it. We're just getting something in place initially. I'm going to create another layer, and I'm going to go back to my orange color, and I'm going to have it at the top end of 2%, but really quite low, so about 15% opacity. And I'm just going to start bringing the orange through the rest of the sky a little bit more. So I'm just bringing out some textures, adding some sections where you've got textures of clouds that are just reflecting back that orange color. Again, broken like we did at the top perhaps, where you could drag it along and then just lift the pencil up and tap it as you move along. We're just trying to encourage these kinds of textures. I'm going to go to the whiter color, and with a really low opacity, again at 10%, maybe I can just pick up some extra highlights in this top section too. And I'm going to increase the size of that to 5%, keep it at the, in fact we'll take it lower to about 5% on the opacity, and just maybe soften that in a little bit more on this edge. Start to get a bleed through from the light into the orange just in this area, I think, and then we'll allow it to remain a bit sharper over here. And then maybe I'll strengthen up that yellow with a bit more of the white as well, or the cream colour. Okay, we'll come back to the sky if we feel it's necessary later on. So I'm going to create another layer at this point. Go back to my colours. Now I've used pretty much the top row, so we're going to move to the next row. And we've got this first colour, as you can see here. It's a red, but quite a soft pastel, almost greyed out version of that. We're going to move to our medium brush. We're going to put it at around 3% size, and we'll keep it at 100% opacity to begin with. And I'm just going to bring in a rise, a bit of a kind of distant kind of mountain, and we're just going to bring it all the way up over this side. We can fill it in, it doesn't really matter what goes below that point because we're going to do trees. Then we're going to go to the next colour along, which you can see is we're going to go to the next colour along, as you can see, it's still kind of in with the red, but a much more greyed out version of it. We're going to turn the opacity down this time to about 40%, have the size of the brush at about 4%, and I'm just going to encourage a little bit more of the dark colour over on this side, and then it gets lighter over here. So I'm allowing it to remain textured, that's not a problem at all, but definitely a bit lighter over here than it is up here. Don't care about this bottom edge, it's getting covered up. So both of that is on the same layer. We'll do two more colours on that same layer. So we'll go for this lighter third colour. We'll turn the brush size down to lower end of 2% and have it really quite low at 15% opacity. And I'm just going to start creating some textures up in the top region. So it might be breaks in the trees, or it might be even snow. So we're just creating some textures up in this top region. Let's turn the opacity up actually to about 30%, let's see. Yeah, I think that works a bit better, a little bit stronger. I'm going to do a mist over the top of it anyway, just to blend it in, I think. But yeah, just a few textures, starts to break it up, make it look a little less flat. Then we're going to go to the fourth colour in, put it up to about 5% opacity, back down again to about 10%, sorry, start again, 5% size and 10% opacity rather, and we're just going to build in some of this dark tone at the very base, and then it's going behind trees pretty quickly, so I'm just blending it in from the bottom there a little bit. And at this point it looks quite scruffy, and I'm quite happy for it to remain so, because it's going to get obscured by trees and other things anyway. It's just building in a foundation for other details that go in front of it. We'll come back to that. Now it's all in one layer, deliberately, so that we can go along that top edge and just rough it in a little bit. In fact, let's do that now. So we'll go to the smudge tool. We'll keep it on the medium brush for the smudge. We'll turn it down to the lower end of 2%. We'll have it quite strong at 80%. And we're just subtly going to push up from that edge and just create a slightly nibbled line as we go up across there. So it's just to give the sense that perhaps there's trees or features along that line. Just stops it looking too flat, makes it look a bit more natural. Now, looking everything on my canvas at this point, I feel like it's encroaching too much down into the composition. This is something that can happen in any format, whether it's traditional or digital. And the beauty of digital is that you can, at any point, amend it. So I'm going to show you this now, and it should be beneficial regardless of whatever else you're doing. So I am going to take layers 1 to 9, and I'm going to pinch them all together. Now you can see that entire background is on one layer, and we've got the mountains, or the distant mountains, are on a separate layer. So we're going to go to the sky layer. I'm going to go to my adjustments, or the transform tool rather. You can see that I can move it around, but I'm going to keep it on freeform. I'm just going to move it so it's away from that lower box. Put it there again, and I'm just going to pinch it up so it squishes the sky in a little bit better. So it's now more contained within that top section, and I can then go to my layer above it. I can perhaps not need to squish that too much, just a little bit, but I am going to move it up to follow and to match the sky again, like that. And now we've got much more space down in the bottom section. Now I do have a strange white section, so I'll go back to the background layer, and well, I can just select that colour with whatever brush and I can just fill it in, put it up to 100% and just fill it in. And then we're back where we were, but we've got a slightly different composition now where it's taking up less of the space, so I think that works better. Go to our top layer and create another layer. I'm going to go back to our colours. I've used the first 4, so I'm going to go for the 5th colour along, and with the medium brush, airbrushing, I'm going to put it at around 10% size and 100% opacity. I'm just going to build in a stripe of it that cuts across here initially. So it's going to go a little bit higher over this side and a little bit lower over this side, something like that. Then with my brushes, I'm going to go to my artistic brushes and the hearts brush. I'm going to put the brush size down to, so you've got the top end of 2% and the bottom end of 2%, so it's pretty much somewhere in the middle of that, if you can find about there. And we'll put it at 90% opacity, and just along this tree top, I'm just going to create some spikes. First of all, you can just go along and create where you want the top of your trees to be. Now you need alternating heights, you don't want them all the same and uniform, otherwise it's going to look really artificial. So you want some of them quite tall, some of them quite bunched together, and then occasionally you want more of a space between them, and whatever you feel is going to look good in your scene really. Then, once you've got your spikes, then you can just work into it left to right and start to build in some of those foliage and some of that appropriate texture. And once we get down to this point, there's no light coming through, so you're good to go. And we just need to basically repeat that with all those tree spikes. So we'll move along all the way across. It's less important over here because we're going to have more prominent trees obscuring it, but we'll do it anyway. Try to vary them up a little bit. Sometimes you'll get almost like a perfect little textured triangle. Other times you'll have bits at the top that don't have as much attached to them. So the more you can create variety, the more natural it's going to look. So swing left to right with this texture, just create variety. Sometimes you can just fill it in, have it completely flat. Other times you can have a lot more spaces between them. So whatever you feel looks good, use a combination. So in addition to that, you could create another layer and you could put the opacity maybe a little lower. We can also change the opacity of the layer, but let's put it to 50%, and we're going to have some trees that we maybe think are going to be slightly more in the distance. So we're filling in some of those gaps, perhaps with trees that are behind the current trees. I think as a general, they'll be a little bit lower. And if you're not satisfied that they look distant enough, then you can go to the layer properties, so click on the N and turn the opacity down, and you can now see that they are much more subdued and pushed back. So that works quite well. Maybe we'll leave it at that. So I put it down to, well, I'll put it at 70% opacity. And now I can go in with the 50% opacity on the brush, and I can add some more, slightly more distant trees just to give a sense of depth. I'll just use this slightly more subdued version just to build up some trees over in this area. Like I say, I'm pretty much going to obscure these ones with more foreground trees anyway, but it does no harm, just have a bit of an extra practice, create a sense of texture here in the background, just in case any of it just pokes through a little bit, but I'm not spending as long on these ones. Not that they were particularly laboured anyway, but even less on these ones. And if they do show through, then I'll just go back in and refine them if necessary. Okay, so create another layer, back to my colours. I'm going to go for this second from the right. You can see it's quite a greyed out blue. I'm going to have it on the airbrushing, soft brush at around 5% size and 5% opacity. And I'm going to start building in this colour now as initially mist, low-lying fog that's just going to interfere with this tree line a little bit. We'll take it all the way across, including down to where maybe the water's edge would be. And then I'm going to reduce it down to top end of 2% and put it a little higher at 10% opacity, and just start building in a little bit more definition. So keeping some kind of round shapes to these areas, almost like it's little cloud shapes. Keep it quite mottled, you don't want it to be flat. Increase the size of the brush up to about 5%, maybe just soften all of this area in. And then we'll move along to the next colour, and again, perhaps even a little bit lower now, so about 3% size and 10% opacity. And just at the top edge, it's going to be even lighter on this top edge, so it's just picking up the lightest of colours. Just along here. In fact, I'm going to turn it back up to 5 or 6%, just have it coming in as a more powerful mist here, because I'm going to do trees in front of this as well. Then back down to 2%, top end of 2, and just control some of the highlights, picking out little points of highlights along here. Don't want to be too crisp about it because I want it to look soft. And if you're worried that you've gone a bit too far with it, you can always go to the adjustments, go to the Gaussian blur, and just blur it in a little bit. If you feel it's gone too strong, I'll just put it at 3 or 4%. We'll come back to that. I do feel like this line actually is where it's meeting the water, which was now layer 3, so I just need to go back to that and just strengthen that line up then. So it was this third colour in here, and I'll put it at 5% size and 100% opacity, just to secure that bottom edge there a little bit better. Okay, so I'll go to my top layer and create another layer. Go back to my colours. I'm going to go to this dark colour, which is pretty much black. I'm going to use my medium brush initially at the lower end of 2% and 100% opacity, and just a little bit lower down from that line, we're just going to have a point at which these trees will grow from. So we can just sketch that in initially. We can paint the tree trunks, decide where the trees are going to be and the general height of them and things like that. And if you feel like it's too strong at the top, then you can always even reduce it down further to 1%, bring in the top of it just a bit more slightly, and then you can always pad it out near the bottom. And then we'll bring some stronger trees over here as well. Now you're not really going to see the actual trunk of the tree very much at all, but it's just helpful to have it in, and then you can always just use that in your mind just to flesh it out with foliage. So they'll do for the tree trunks. So again, we're going to go back to the artistic brush and the hearts brush, we'll keep it at about the 2% size, but we are going to put it back up to the 90% opacity. And again, starting at the top of the tree trunk, and here you can leave some gaps. And I'm thinking, because we're a bit closer, we're going to have a bit more detail, and imagining the branches pointing upwards on the left and then the right. We'll just give it a bit more definition. And then as we go down, we're still keeping it a little bit chaotic. They don't line up neatly, symmetrically. As a general rule, just swinging left to right, having the branches in a kind of pointing up shape. And do another one here. Again, you can leave bits of that tree trunk quite sparse if you want. And then I'm going to move along, do all the trees, essentially in the same way. Now, if you want to spend longer and find some actual tree references and just really get into the accuracy of the way that tree might look, then go for it. And one thing I would say is that when we get up to the area where it's immediately in front of a lighter background, perhaps we could use a warmer base colour and then start to build it from there. So I'll show you that. We'll go to our colours. I'll go to this colour, which is the 5th colour at the top, and we'll use the same brush, but perhaps I'll just start with this warmer colour over on this area. And then we can switch back to the black colour and take over that colour as it gets a little bit further away from the lighter area. And it's not to say you can't go over the top of it, because it is like a warmer colour that's shining through. So it is just the base colour, and then you can just darken it up as well. But the combination of the two is just going to help soften it in a little bit better. So once you're happy with that, then we can go to the next colour, which is this dark green. And it's not really going to be super obvious, but we'll put it down to about 80%. And you can just build in some breaks in that texture just to flesh it out, stop it looking quite so dead and flat. I'm just keeping it on the same layer. I'm not too bothered. It's only a subtle element anyway, so don't spend too long on this. You're just breaking up the black silhouette a little bit with a hint of green. We're going to put more green a little lower down, so it pays to have a little bit of the texture in the trees too. I'm going to create another layer, go to our colours, and we've got these two greens. So I'm going to use the darker green initially, and I'm going to use the soft brushes. In fact, I use the medium brush on the airbrush. I'm going to have it at around 3% size, but turn it down to about 60% opacity, and I'm just going to build in this green, which will look dramatically greener compared to what we've just used. And I'm also going to bring it in to like sections that are just creeping in over here as well. Like this, and then we're going to immediately move to the lighter green, and we're going to dramatically turn the size down to the lower end of 2%, and we'll turn it lower on the opacity to about 30% as well. And just along that top edge of the green, I'm just going to bring some tufts, some texture, some highlights along the top edge there. And perhaps I'll turn it down even further to about 20% because it is a bit strong. And then I'll just further encourage the sense that there's texture and lumps this grass area just by randomly kind of almost creating dome shapes. I can bring a little bit of it over into this section where the trees are. And we can also go to our calligraphy brush and the water pen. So we'll put it at about 70% opacity and about 11-12% size, and we can just start bringing in some of these lines for grass, just a bit sharper, a bit more defined grass than what we were doing before, especially along that top edge. You can just add a bit more texture longer strokes that just naturally start a bit thicker because of the way that you'll press on a bit more and then lift off, and it'll just create those blades of grass a little bit more effectively. But we can alternate between the light green and the dark green, so we get layers of it. And the longer you spend doing this, probably the more effective that's going to look. I'm doing it quite quick, so I'm expecting it to remain relatively rough looking, and I'm okay with that because I'm just trying to get you to the overall effect. And beyond that, you can experiment and play around. Back to my airbrushing with the dark green soft brush. I'm going to put it at about 3% size and about 50% opacity, and I'm just going to continue to maybe soften it in a little bit. It looks a little bit sharp, some of those blades of grass, so I'm just softening that effect in a little bit. It's still there, but it's not going to be quite as, I don't know, specific as it was. I think a slightly softer, gentler, more subtle effect is actually good. So I'm using a combination of the brushes to build that effect in. I think too much of any one brush sometimes can be not good. So use the combination, soften it in with the airbrush, but then create a little bit more texture with the more specific brush. I think I'm just going to remove some of that from that section. Feels like there's just too much of it. So I'm going to take my background, I'm going to duplicate that layer. Now the only bit of that sky I'm interested in is the top section, so what I'll do is I'll go to the transform tool, or the selection tool rather, and I'll go on the rectangle and I'll select all the bits I don't want reflected in the water for this background, which is all that bottom section. I'll go to my layer, I'll tap on the layer and I'll clear all of that bottom section, which now means I can go to the transform tool, flip it vertically, and I've only got that top section, and I can move that top section down to where I want the reflection to be, which is somewhere in that kind of region. Now, I might have to blur that in and amend that in a short while, but we're going to do similar with the other layers we've got. So we've got this layer, which has those trees on it, and the layer that gives the distant trees. So what I shall do is I shall blur them both together, or pinch them both together. Now, the pinching can be quite tricky. So another way of doing that is tap on the top layer, click merge down, and now all those two layers are merged together. So we'll duplicate that layer. Again, go to the transform, flip horizontally, and now we can move that layer down to where we need it to be, which is about there will work. And then we'll go to the next layer that needs a reflection, which will be this layer, so layer 6, as I've got it now. Duplicate that layer, go to the transform tool, go to the flip vertically, and bring that down as well, like that. And we're starting to get the overall impression now of a reflection in water, which is great. But all of those reflections are going to be a little bit too sharp, so we need to blur them slightly. So that is the reflection there. So I'm going to go to the adjustments, I'm going to go to the Gaussian blur and just blur it in to about the 3%. Go to the next one that's reflected. So you just have to tap the layers to test them. So it's this layer, adjustments, Gaussian blur, blur that in perhaps a little bit more to 4%. Then I go to the sky layer, which is this one in my instance. Go to the adjustments, Gaussian blur, and just blur that in. I'm going to blur that a bit more to about 6%, something like that. Now we've just got the job of trying to merge things together a little bit more. So I'm going to go to my top layer, add a new layer, back to my colours, and we've got these mist colours, so I'm going to start really using these now to start bringing things together. So the end colour on the soft brush, 3% size and 20% opacity, and the surface of the water, I'm going to have a low-lying mist that just really settles on that edge, on that surface. So we're going to rate a really nice light colour here. Make that really nice and crisp, and then I'm going to start bringing it down in sort of bands here as well. And then I'm going to increase it up to about 5% and just start to create these rounder shapes just to get a sense that there's a texture to it as well. So we can always reduce it down to something like 3% and lower that opacity to about 5%, and just really be a bit more confident, then we can start going for the texture. I'm pressing on a bit more and just really going for it, building it up. So sideways stripes as well as that circular motion, just generally helping it all blend in a little bit more. So it's going to be more concentrated, more noticeable around here, but you won't really notice it as you're coming lower into this section, but you will notice it up here. So if you feel like the dark colours are just too much, just keep going over it until it gradually softens it in, until you're happiest with it. And again, I'm going to use this blue on that basis just to build in a little bit more of the blue mist up here. So I'm going to concentrate it back up to about 15% and 4% size, just to really strengthen it up here and just to build in that mist. So don't go too high up because it is a slightly darker colour, and you can see up there that it doesn't work. It only really works when you go over the darker colour. So I can use the blue and the lighter colour at the end just to start creeping in some more of this mist into this area, some nice texture. And let's just increase the size up actually to about 10% size, and just with this end colour, just bring some of that mist in a little bit more dramatically. Soften it at the edges perhaps, so it really knocks those trees back. I feel in some ways like I could have made those trees bigger at the edge. So the beauty of digital work is that you can go in and amend it. So I'm going to go to that layer where the trees are, go to my selection tool, just perhaps with freehand actually. So we'll start that one again. With the freehand, just select the trees that I want to play with, go to the transform, and I can just increase the size of them, make them as big as I want, like that. I think that works a bit better. Some of the warm colour that I had before is now looking a bit strange on that, so you might need to adjust things like that, which is not a big deal. We're on that layer, we'll just go to the dark colour, artistic, hearts brush, and just start to override some of that warm colour a little bit. And I suppose, you know, that should be reflected slightly more in this bottom section as well, so we'll just add that in a little bit there as well. Last layer on top, go top layer, then we'll go to the calligraphy, water pen. We'll go for this darker green, so the second colour in, and let's just check the size. It's about the 12% again, and we'll put it up to 100% opacity. And I'm just going to imagine that there's just some of the grass that's over here is just, you know, here as well. So perhaps we're just stood on the edge of the water, similar to over there, and we're just getting a few blades of grass that are just coming into the scene as well. Go to my sky layer, top layer. I feel like I just want to ramp up the light, so a bit of a cheat, but it really is effective. Go to the bloom and just turn it up a little bit. So I'm going to put it at around, if I just see on 0, I'm going to put it up to around 13% in that instance. And I'll do the same for the reflection as well. Bloom, turn it up a little bit less, so about 10% for there. I do think looking at this layer, the greens there are a little bit too vibrant, and that sometimes happens, so we can easily fix that. We can go to the hue, saturation and blur, and perhaps we can just turn the saturation down a smidge to about 45, maybe even the darkness in a little bit down to just a percentage even makes a big difference. So I'm going to put it down to 48. Last detail on top, I think I'm going to go to the black colour with airbrushing medium brush, put it down to 1% size and 90% opacity. And I'm just going to create a couple of branches that maybe are sticking out of the water. Something like this. And then I can go to that layer, duplicate it, transform, flip vertically, move it down so we get the mirror. Maybe with that version you can just go to the adjustments, motion blur, and just a hint is enough to just separate the two. So something about 10%. And obviously if you haven't got it joined up, then just do make sure to tidy up if necessary, or just get rid of the bits that haven't quite worked. Okay, I hope you've enjoyed following along. If you have and you're pleased with your results, then make sure to tag me on Instagram if you're going to post it, or share them in the Facebook group with the other members and you get feedback. Hit the thumbs up button, it really helps out the channel in the algorithm on YouTube. If you haven't already subscribed, make sure to do that, and I shall catch you back here soon. See you later.